You've been told you need to be strong. But what if strength doesn't always mean holding it all together? What if true resilience feels more like water, flowing, flexible, and alive with God's love? In this series, you'll discover how you can move from surviving to thriving, finding a strength that heals, restores, and carries you forward.
Hello.
Hi there.
It's so good to have you here, Aundi. Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. It's wonderful to be with you.
So I thought that tonight we would start off by just asking you, why did you want to write Strong Like Water? You wrote Try Softer first. Strong Like Water, I think, was born during the pandemic. What gave rise to that?
Yeah. Well, so
Try Softer was a book that I needed to write first. I'll just say, I think in part because my whole life, I think a lot of the way that I survived was I looked very strong. I was really good. I was really good at white knuckling. And that is a part of what, a lot of my story is that I survived a lot of childhood trauma, complex trauma developing into complex PTSD. And so that is part of my story. And so Try Softer was important because I had gotten so good at armoring up in my life. And sometimes that was achievement, and sometimes that was just being tough. It was suppressing my emotions, all these things. But that, so the question, strong like water, what I also noticed was that I didn't want to get rid of. I didn't know quite what to do with all of my strength, to be honest. Because even though I have developed a lot of self-compassion, and that is just a muscle that I've been working for many years. I probably have about 20 years of my own recovery in terms of from my childhood trauma. And it hasn't been perfect. It hasn't been, it's not this perfect linear line, but I have a lot of practice. But even, during the pandemic but even before the pandemic, I had this sense of this ambivalence around strength, where I knew and have known in my life, and not just me, I've seen it in so many of my clients. I've seen it in people that I love who've been through hard things. Like they go through something hard, and I simultaneously hate that they had to go through something hard. Sometimes I say, that I grieve for people that they've had to be so resilient.
Yeah.
And yet oftentimes you see these things that come out of that too. You're like, I don't know how you did that, but I honor that because I know that cost you. And so that's a long way to say that I have had this ambivalent relationship with strength for many years. And strong like water, in a way, has been my attempt to sort of reclaim the idea of strength. Because what I found is that when I was merely surviving my trauma, when I looked really strong, when I was disconnected from my body and suppressing my emotions, people thought I was really strong.
Yeah.
And then what happened is that when I began to honor my body's limits, when I began to be willing to really feel my feelings, when I went through a season, and really it wasn't just a season, but it began in a way where I was like, oh, I'm so tender. I would watch commercials for the Olympics, and I'm just, I'm crying, and I'm like, holy cow, I have all this emotion, and no longer was that thought to be strong. But I knew that I hadn't lost the things that God had given me that had allowed me to survive some really hard things. But I didn't want to have to be in a trauma response. And I thought, as I looked at my clients, as I looked at the way our bodies are designed, I began to conceptualize this idea that maybe surviving is strength.
Yeah.
And I know, for most of the folks who are listening, you've already read the book. This is, that situational strength, sometimes we have that life or death strength that allows us to get through really hard things. And what if, right, that strength is more than just that? And to me, it's like it opened up like a key, it sort of opened up this whole other way of being like, our expansiveness, our ability to feel our feelings and be with pain and know our limits, these are also strength.
Yeah.
And so that journey, my own personal wrestling, but then also transferring to my readers, who that I've gotten to interact with, so many of them, but also my clients, just seeing this need to say, I don't want people to think that the only way to be strong is to harm themselves.
Mm.
Because I think that goes deeply against God's heart for us. And really conflicts, I think, with what it means to be able to heal.
I love that. When we first started the series, I was really, I mean, the other two pastors on our team were on board and excited about it, but I was really the one who's like, I really think we need to do this book. And then we got to the first message and I was like, oh man, this is really tough. Like I had to like share some of my story and like the coping mechanisms I developed. And it made me step back and ask why I was so excited about it. And I thought back to a moment, it was a couple of years ago. I was pretty depressed. I was really struggling. I had a hard time like feeding myself. And I stopped on the way to a meeting and got McDonald's. And former me would say that was like giving in, or that was like a failure. And I was able to claim that as strength and say like this, I'm feeding myself in whatever way I can. And that's a win. So
yeah, that's beautiful. And thank you for sharing that. And yeah, I think in our culture, we sometimes, not everyone, but many people have a really rigid view of what it means to be strong.
Yeah.
And I think that in and of itself, like even if you don't have a history of trauma, even if there's lots of caveats, right? Even if those are not your story, but just to live in a culture that assumes that strength requires you to leave yourself, to disconnect from your body, that in and of itself is huge.
Yeah.
Because we are designed for belonging, right? And so if belonging means I have to like leave myself, that creates a pattern in us. And really from a faith lens, when we're disconnected from these God-given bodies, right? This is the place where we can so often, like, it allows us to experience God. It allows us often, I think it gives us access to the God-given wisdom of our bodies. There's so much that happens when we are with ourselves. And so, yeah, I mean, thank you for sharing that. And I think it's so common.
Yeah.
What you're saying.
Yeah. When I think about that, you were just talking about being with ourselves and like how important that is. Sometimes I've struggled with being with myself and then letting that keep me from doing hard things. And I feel like maybe there's a balance there or some kind of tension. When we were working through it this time, I recognized how a lot of this work is giving me agency to decide when and how, like, okay, I have the tools to be regulated, and then I'm going to experience this thing that is hard and dysregulating, and then I'm going to regulate again. Can you speak a little bit to that? And also maybe like, how do we decide when we should do that?
Yeah, well, I think that's such a great question. And I think the first thing that I would want to name is that there's such a stigma in faith spaces around having a self. Just in and of itself. And particularly, if you're a woman, if you're a person of color, like if you have other, identities that have been discriminated against, it gets like harder and harder almost, but I think this is true for just about everyone, that we're just like taught. And I believe that's a form of weaponized theology there, right? And because it's so problematic, in part because we have to have a place from which we are participating with God, right? We are not robots. Like this doesn't happen just like, God could control us in that way, but God chooses not to. And I think that's so significant. And I mean, we could even say more about that, but I want to address your original question. But I want to name that first and foremost, because I think what's hard is that even taking the space to listen to ourselves, to tune into ourselves to maybe offer some compassion. If that's been the way you've survived your whole life, that's going, like, by not doing those things, when you start doing them, you can get a whiplash.
Yes.
Right. And so I want to just acknowledge that, because that can feel like, oh my gosh, I'm being so selfish. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just name that, because we want to make sure that we're seeing that clearly too. Because there's, in trauma work in particular, before we ever go into processing, we always are building safety and stability first. That's the beginning work of therapeutic, like when we're talking about, like trauma recovery, for example. And I know not everybody who's listening today maybe would identify themselves as a trauma survivor, and that is a good thing. But for that model, for our nervous system needs enough safety to be uncomfortable. So when I come back to your question, that would be the litmus test. Is, do you have enough safety so you can be uncomfortable in a way that's not harmful?
That's so good.
Versus feeling like, now I can rest, now I can be kind to myself, but now I have to go harm myself. Right? So the work is not to ricochet between kindness and harm. And sometimes we can't prevent harm. Like, we're not always in control of that. The world is not always safe. There are real legitimate things that happen. So I'm not necessarily talking about that. Like, sometimes we don't have those choices. But when we have a choice, to the best of our ability, we want to try to pace ourselves and to say, okay, like, I'm maybe feeling a little bit more myself and grounded. What is the amount of this hard thing that I feel like I can do that wouldn't cause me to feel like I am going to, like, using the language of the window of tolerance. Like, I don't have to totally leave my window of tolerance. Or when I use the flow of strength, like, I'm not all in situational strength. I want to try to be in at least transitional strength, meaning I've got at least some compassionate resources. Whether that's a person, is that a faith practice? Is that spacing in my day? Is that making sure that I have time to check in with myself? Is it making sure I have the ability to recover after doing something hard? Those are all examples of ways that we can make sure we can do hard things, but hopefully not in a way that's harmful, only uncomfortable.
I love that framing. It clicked something for me. Last week, I went to Washington, D.C. with a group of clergy to advocate for humane treatment of immigrants. And we talked to our lawmakers. And I was talking to my therapist about it beforehand. And I'm like, I'm feeling some anxiety about this. And I know that this is important. And I know that I have the resources that I need to prepare for it and to recover from it.
Yeah.
But 2 years ago, I didn't. And like, the difference that you're talking about is what I've experienced. Like, 2 years ago, I didn't have the ground level compassionate resources safety that I could have engaged that well. I might have pushed myself to do it, but it wouldn't have been without harm.
Yeah, thank you for naming that, and thank you for going, because it makes sense. It makes sense that would bring things up. And this is, in a way, this whole conversation that we're talking about is part of also why I wanted to write Strong Like Water. Because in Try Softer, I really go into the window of tolerance and helping people learn, like, how to pay compassionate attention to our bodies, which is a huge thing. I mean, that's huge for anyone to learn to do that, right? And this work, oftentimes, as we learn to listen to ourselves, what we'll find is, obviously, the world is still the world. The things that have happened to us, they don't just go away. Difficult people don't simply disappear. And so the question is, do you have what you need? And can we cultivate more of what we need so that we can face those things in a way that causes as least harm to us as possible? And God willing, maybe even that we would be able to face them in a way that we are ultimately, it's not trauma at all. Maybe it's also part of our repair.
Yeah.
And often, maybe God willing, the repair of others, right? To love our neighbor as we love ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so often, I think just like anything in the world, this stuff can get rigid, like I'm safe or I'm not safe.
Right.
But that's not how healing works.
Right.
The way that healing works is, like, let's say someone's working with me in trauma therapy. First, we're developing really good sense of felt safety.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so important. And then as they feel ready, and obviously with consent,
Right.
we're actually moving into a place of what I would call a mixed state.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this in the book is what I would consider transitional strength.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where we've maybe got some activation. Like maybe it's, maybe an experience. Sometimes it might even be a memory. Sometimes it might be a conversation I need to have that's a little bit difficult. And we're trying to bring it into, if it's in therapy, we're bringing it into therapy in a way where the person still feels connected to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And the activation in their body, there's still a sense of safety present. So the safety plus the activation is the thing that ultimately is really where people experience a lot of change.
Yeah.
That's where a lot of growth, I would say, 60 to 70% of therapy is in transitional strength.
That makes so much sense. I feel like transitional strength is maybe where the most work happens.
Mm-hmm.
At least the most conscious work.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily something that, even for people who've been doing a lot of healing work, we don't graduate from our bodies. Right? So like you might have an issue that you come in with and you've got lots of situational strength around it.
Mm-hmm.
And you get resourced and you feel more grounded. Maybe you move towards transitional strength. Maybe you even do some processing like I do, eye movement and desensitization, reprocessing with people. So maybe they potentially metabolize that. They move into integrated strength. They begin to be able to acknowledge like, man, this is like, I can see this a little bit more clearly. Here are some key takeaways that I wish it didn't happen to me, but I see, maybe these people that were with me and I see God's faithfulness. Like these are the types of things that often come up. But later that day, you might be back with your family or a friend and something happens. And potentially it might bring up situational strength again, or it may bring you just a transitional strength. Mm-hmm. Because in a way, this is why I love the metaphor of water, of just the way it's like, we're just always moving. And the beauty of that is that it's all valuable. Yeah. And that the work is never going to be, oh, well, I got to integrated strength and there's my gold star. And now God really loves me.
I made it.
Yeah, like now I'm so, and I think so many of us, especially in our culture, are trained to think that way.
Yeah.
Now I made it. Now I get to move on and graduate.
Mm-hmm.
And this is more a framework of saying, our bodies are pretty magnificent. And the fact that we have situational strength is a gift. Because we need survival energy. There are times that require that from us. We don't want to get rid of it. Mm-hmm. And we need transitional strength because we need to be able to tend pain. We need to be able to begin that journey of thinking about thinking in the places where things are still imperfect and unfinished. And then what a gift that we can metabolize. And that can oftentimes become new resources for us. Like, remember that time that I went to Washington, D.C. and I was able to stay grounded and I was able to do this thing. Wow, what a gift.
Yeah, I love that. I want to pull us out of the conversation just a little bit because I neglected to invite you to introduce yourself.
Oh,
And like I said, oh, it's Aundi. And like, you know, presumably people who are joining us know that you're the author of Strong Like Water. But could you take just a minute to introduce yourself?
yes. Yep. So I'm Aundi Kolber. I'm a licensed therapist and author. I've been doing this work as a therapist. I think it's been almost 19 years. I need to count and look, but I specialize in the area of trauma. And I am the author of, I have 5 published works and 2 bigger sort of, they call them trade books. So Try-Softer Guided Journey, Strong Like Water Guided Journey. And then my newest actually I have it right here, so I'll show it to you. It's a little coffee table, sort of almost like a gift book, quote book called Take What You Need. But I love that title because it's so much at the heart of how I offer my work is through that lens of really wanting people to honor their agency. And part of my story, if folks hadn't heard it, is that I'm also a trauma survivor. I have a history of complex PTSD from my childhood and have been doing recovery work for a long time. And that has been part of what sort of inspires me to do this work, is that I want there to be more resources for folks to know how to work with their body and to be able to bring their faith with them in a way that, God willing, is not harmful and hopefully even healing.
Thank you. Sort of along those lines and related to the question we were just talking about, I'm going to share this from Shelly Mull. She's looking for some examples of that harm to self that we're referring to. So when we're thinking about, I think that what she's talking about is, if I went to DC and I harmed myself, what would that look like? Because I'm not talking about physically harming. So,
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, let's just say it could include that.
Because
sometimes, so Shelly, and I'm not sure how much Shelly knows about like the window of tolerance, but I just want to just briefly name this, maybe in case people don't always know about it. So one of the frameworks I use a lot when we're talking about our nervous system is what's called the window of tolerance, which is a concept first coined by Dr. Dan Siegel. And so essentially the window of tolerance is a range of arousal in which we can feel our feelings or have an experience, recall a memory, really just to do just about anything. Mm-hmm. And what happens when we are in the window is that we sort of have access to our full brain and body. We have access, like our prefrontal cortex is online, and that brings together a lot of integrative work. It allows us to be able to do things like long-term plan, and we can learn and we can be curious. It also helps facilitate the experience of being able to connect with other people. We tend to feel the most like ourselves. It's also a place from which basically our higher order thinking, like really our ability to be our best self, is available to us in that place. Not that we're perfect, but that is an important part of just sort of like generally like being a human. It's a really important thing for us. Mm-hmm. So when our bodies experience a certain level of real or perceived threat, and when I say that, what I mean is that sometimes it could be based off of old experiences of pain. Like, so it could be verbal abuse. It could be sexual violence. It could be physical, like physical abuse. It could be a car accident. It could be something like, climate, shock or trauma connected. Like basically our body is always scanning for safety or threat. And it does this below our conscious awareness. And essentially what can happen is that when we leave that range of arousal, because we feel we're experiencing a certain level of threat, that window of tolerance, it goes offline. And we begin to go into either a stress response or potentially a trauma response. And that's going to look a little bit different for each person. We're basically trying to address whatever threat we feel. And so usually that's going to first go fight or flight, or it could potentially be like fawning, which is over accommodating someone who's potentially harmful to us. And if that doesn't resolve the threat, we might go down into a level of dissociation, which is feeling disconnected from our body. And it can range. It could go from like feeling depressed all the way, like let's say in a situation of sexual violence, someone could actually lose consciousness because their body just says, I can't do it. Mm-hmm. So I say all of that, Shelly, to come back to your question, to say an example of harming yourself is let's say I know that I am aware that someone wants to meet with me who has been verbally abusive to me. And I feel like for whatever reason, I feel like I have to meet with them. I feel like I don't have a choice. And so I maybe put myself into a situation in which, in that situation, my body, my neuroception, my body's perception of my safety, I start to get flooded in my nervous system. And potentially, like maybe I say yes to something that I'm not okay with. That would be an example of harm. It could be I start to have a panic attack, potentially something like that. Some people, depending on their story, it could include things like self-harm through like cutting. It might mean that afterwards, my nervous system is so like ramped up that I'm using substances to come back down, because it's so what that discomfort is so much that my body can't tolerate it. So those would be like types of ways that maybe it doesn't look obvious in that moment that it's harming me. But if my body doesn't have the resources, the safety, the boundaries, then I might be stepping into something that I don't have the capacity for. It's maybe not ultimately good for me.
Yeah. Thank you. That I found that very helpful. So I'm trying to decide which direction to go in for the next question, because we're talking about self-harm. We're talking about what that could look like. And someone has asked, they recently were diagnosed as being autistic, an adult who said that they're afraid to fully feel their emotions because they get intense and overwhelming, and they're afraid that they might go into a cycle of self-harm or something like that. But they want to thrive. They want to be in this integrated strength. So how could they do that? Yeah.
Well, to this person, thank you for asking this question. And I think it's really brave just to ask it. And, so I'm going to answer this kind of generally, obviously, because I can't give specific advice. But what I will say is that, first of all, I want to honor the part of you that feels like I don't want to feel this. Yeah. And I know that's going to sound like a paradox, because you're like, aren't you a therapist? You think people should feel their feelings. But here's why I say it that way. Because often our bodies, we figure out lots of ways to survive. And sometimes what can happen in our desire to want to heal is that we learn sort of like what I was talking about earlier, that white knuckling mentality, that mentality of just like, whatever it takes, I'm going to do that hard thing no matter what it costs me. But here's the thing about our bodies, and this is something I say a lot, is that we really want to honor the pace of our body. And what that means in this kind of a situation is to say there's actually a certain wisdom to you recognizing, if I try to feel all of this, it might be too much. And this is an area where it's actually really important to find like a skilled therapist to work with. Because, a person who works with the nervous system, who understands trauma, really will respect like, just like I was talking about at the, like earlier on in our talk, that we always begin with safety and stability, right? So in these kinds of instances, the work is actually not to dive in to all this emotional processing. The work is to begin to build enough resourcing and safety. So like an example of that in the book, I think I talk about like grounding. Right? And grounding has become pretty common, which I'm grateful for. But part of what we're trying to do when we're grounding is literally we're trying to help our body come into the present. Because God willing, the present is actually safe, right? So we're trying to orient our body to even just get to a place where we feel neutral. Because like if you are a person where emotions have not been safe, and there are a lot of people for whom that's been true. Maybe anytime they tried to express an emotion as a kiddo, maybe that was shamed. Maybe it was systems that you were in. Maybe it was, just the family system itself. Maybe it was that you experienced something specifically traumatic and you didn't get the support you needed. And your body began to internalize the belief that feeling emotions are unsafe. All of these things happen to people all the time. Yeah. And it's common for that to happen. And part of the work is the trajectory that you're going on is to think of it like if your emotions are like a pool. And on one side of the pool is like, when my kids were little, I would take them to the pool that had like the zero, what is it called?
The slope in. Yeah.
Yes. It's really shallow at the beginning. And then, like further in the pool, it might get deep. But in a way, when you have had to internalize a belief, like when you've needed to not feel your emotions to be safe, where you want to actually start is very like in that shallow end, like I'm just gonna dip my toe in.
Yeah.
And that's cool. And we even, and I want to say that this is where it's so important to have a skilled therapist supporting us because they do something called titration. And titration is this concept within therapy where we learn little by little to do something, right? Trauma inherently is too much. It's too fast. It's too soon. And so healing actually needs to be the opposite of that. Healing needs to be at the pace of our body, the amount that our body can tolerate, with the gentleness that our body can tolerate. These are the ways that the repair has to match the wounding. And we can only do that in the way that actually honors our body. If we try to heal in the way that continues to harm our body, it will create more harm. So for the person that asked this question, I just want to encourage you to continue to pace yourself, to know that that's really normal. It's actually really loving and compassionate. And I think it's actually wise. And then to begin to get skills around, I think of it like I can take this out for a little while and then I can also put it back. And those are really good skills to have in that process.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. It makes me think of like one of my classes in seminary was pastoral care and like crisis intervention. And it was a very small amount of my training, but one of the main things that I came away with is how important our coping mechanisms are. And we would call that situational strength, but like, it's not avoidance. It's your brain saying, I cannot process this and I need to take it slowly. I'm going to put it in this box and I'm going to deal with it later. And
Yeah. And to your point from earlier, where you were talking about it through the lens of like having more choice about how to engage it, that right there, that point is part of how you're in transitional strength. feeling like you have a choice is a sign. It's a signal. It's part of what happens as we come up out of survival and we begin to say, no, like I get to decide if I work on this today or if I don't, right? I get to decide if that person, what kind of boundaries are appropriate for that relationship. It's my choice to do that. And when we don't feel like we have that choice, part of the work is actually, instead of going to problem solving, which so many of us want to do, it's actually to get more resourced first. Because what happens is we get more of our brain online.
Yeah.
And as we get more of our brain online, then we actually are better able to face what we're trying to work through.
So good. Reminds me of when I was at the beginning of the depression that I was experiencing a couple of years ago. I sort of became aware of it. And then I talked to my therapist and I was like, I'm not trying to fix this. I'm just like, I'm noticing it. And she was like, how do you know to do that? And I think I credited your book. But like, just that idea of like, I can't fix all of this right now. I'm becoming aware of it. And I think that helped me move into transitional strength, where with her help, I was able to get some more resources. Yeah. But it was ongoing. Some of the experiences that I was having were ongoing. So it took a good long time. But that brings me to another question. Someone who shared a question with me experiences chronic illness and painful medical tests and other things like that. I think this could apply also to systemic oppression or paying attention to the news cycle and being triggered by lots of the stuff that is on the news cycle. How can we practice these strong like water principles when we're experiencing ongoing trauma?
Yeah. Well, I think that's so real, and it's very applicable to our world today. There is a lot of ongoing harm that's happening in multiple ways, and I think it's actually important that we acknowledge that, because I think when we don't, it forces us to like potentially spiritually bypass or turn to like toxic positivity, kind of, because the question becomes sort of like, well, why aren't you more okay then? Right. And so acknowledging, like, sometimes I say, like, it feels hard because it is hard. Like it's, and I think, so I want to name some of those things because I think there's a form of honoring. For those that have read the book, you'll note, I mean, I use the language of honor a lot. And I do that because I find that we have a lack of honor in our culture. I think that we tend to, for lots of reasons, and there are even reasons that are worthy of compassion. But we have not been taught how to be with pain very well, whether it's ours or other people's. And so I think that one of the things that I would just say is like, so what does that look like? And I think one is, it's going to sound paradoxical, but it is the honoring. It's acknowledging the reality of something. Because so often it's easy to skip ahead to like, let's solve this problem, or and it's not that there's not choices or things to do, but sometimes that gets our body straight, and it might send us into activation. It might send us, our nervous system, into fight or flight, when part of what we need is as much a grounded response of our full self as we can, God willing, knowing that God is with us, all of these things, bringing the fullness of that to what we're facing gives us the best opportunity to, what I would say, we're trying to think about, how can we reduce the impact? How can we reduce the harm of something that might be happening? Because I think folks who are listening, they may know this or they may not, but something to understand is that when you go through something that has the potential to become trauma, and there are lots of things, right? There are like, whether that's a car accident, sexual violence, it could be like relational trauma. It could be narcissistic abuse. It could be, there are many things. But instead of it being like a binary, like, oh, you experienced trauma, therefore X, Y, and Z will automatically happen. Because of what we are coming to understand about our body, because of what research suggests to us about how the nervous system works, and frankly, what I've just observed as a therapist for almost 19 years, is that the more resourced we can be as we experience something hard, the more potential to be as resilient. And I mean this in the best sense of the word, not a weaponized resilience, but as resilient as possible to what we're facing.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean that there won't be impact. That doesn't mean that there may not still be some trauma residue from that experience. But it's sort of like saying, rather than being like, well, this bad thing's going to happen, I guess I'm just going to let it happen.
Right.
It's sort of like, I know this thing is happening. How can let's put on your seatbelt. Oh, you're in a car accident. Let's make sure there's an airbag and a seatbelt.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't mean the car accident's not happening. It means that hopefully that might lessen some of the impact. And so with all that said, there's caveats, because not everybody has the same access to what it would require to be more resourced, right?
Yeah.
Because therapy might be a resource, but not everybody is able to get into therapy. Community is a resource. Not everybody feels like they have the community, or maybe that they feel safe enough in the community to talk about those things. Being able to move your body, making sure you're getting enough sleep, having places where you feel like your nervous system can settle. Having experiences that allow you to really connect and feel like yourself. These are all indicative of ways that your body essentially taps into this part of our nervous system, this rest and digest part of our nervous system. And from our earlier part of our conversation, we were talking about these mixed states, right? So essentially, that's what's happening. If you can bring some safety to something that has been hard, the systems of your body that metabolize pain, the systems that allow something that you experience to go into, for example, long-term memory and not be fragmented into trauma, those are essentially available to you when we have enough of that. It's like our vagus nerve, our rest and digest. We feel connected to ourselves. Our prefrontal cortex is online. So coming back to this original question for this person, I think the other thing that I would just say that I think is a really undervalued resource is self-compassion. And I would say that, and not that that's an easy one necessarily to even do, because I know that can be really challenging. But just even acknowledging, that's where I think it sometimes is helpful for ourselves to say, oh, this is hard.
Yeah.
This is hard. And it makes sense that I am struggling right now. Those types of internal postures. And from a faith lens, I think of it like God is already so deeply, wildly compassionate. Like that's God's posture to us. Could we borrow just a little?
Yeah.
Could we steward 5% of that? To say, could I offer a little bit of that? And could I give that to the part of myself who's the most struggling? Could they get to partake a little bit of that? And so sometimes even when those other resources feel out of reach, beginning to get curious about, is there a way that I can offer some compassion to myself that feels accessible? In and of itself, I think is just so, it's actually deeply preventative. Because it allows us, rather than staying in that threat response, our body's able to sink more back into ourselves.
It reminds me of ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Experiences. Does the S stand for something?
I don't know, actually, now that I'm thinking about it.
But like how those are indicative or like predictive of certain outcomes unless there's an adult who's there to support the child. And what I hear you saying in a lot of ways is that we can be that adult for ourselves.
Yes.
Once we have the resources, but like so that it doesn't have to stay in our bodies forever. It doesn't have to impact us long term. It's going to impact us. It's going to be hard, but we can be that presence for ourselves.
Yeah.
With God and with our community.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And that's where it's like, putting it in the framework of strong like water, like that's transitional strength.
Mm-hmm.
Because essentially that's what we're talking about. Like when I say thinking about thinking, what I'm partly meaning is we have the capacity to be aware of what's happening in our body.
Yeah.
And so, and there's a couple different psychological theories that I could pull out that I'm not going to, but the idea being like we sort of have a self, and this self, and maybe from a Christian lens, we could even call it like a true self, right? That this self that's able, like participating with God, is able to sort of lend care and compassion to parts of ourselves that everybody has parts that we have. Sometimes those parts develop really extreme ways of operating in the world. Or another way to say is like it's a pattern that develops, right? However you think of it, sometimes I talk about like as an inner child, a younger selves, right? So now that adult self is sort of working to say, hey, I know this happened to you when you were, I'm just making this up, but when you were 12.
Yeah.
Right. And what we're doing is the way that our body experiences pain is that when we have a lot of activation around pain, we actually our body loses the ability to tell the difference between past and present. So for folks, because it's happening in our right hemisphere of our amygdala, and that part of our brain doesn't tell time. And so, for folks who are listening, maybe you've experienced that sense where you feel so activated. And maybe something that happened to you a long time ago, it feels like it's happening right now. Right. And so part of our work when it's happening there, oftentimes we might need support of someone else. We're wanting to do some grounding because part of what we're trying to do is get our self, our adult self back online. So we can tend that pain, so that we can work with that pain. And that's what I mean when I say we're leaving that window of tolerance. That's when we know, we are no longer in the window. Yeah. And this is our body giving us that information, like this feels deeply unsafe.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't say that in any way to shame folks. It's more just information. It tells us like, okay, there's some work, there's some pain to tend to here, and that is worthy of care.
Yeah. You were talking about thinking about thinking. I talk sometimes about our feelings about our feelings. When I shame myself because I should feel more grateful for this, or I should feel more optimistic, or I should feel this, instead of saying, actually, this is just what I'm feeling right now. And I'm going to accept it. Like I can't change that really. Or I could try to, but it usually doesn't work very well.
Yeah. Yep. And when we can learn to sort of, that's where sometimes, I'll be like, some of my therapist friends, I'll be like, I'm having a parts party. Like there's a lot happening. And just honoring that oftentimes is that place where it's like, we need those resources almost like to let things settle so we can begin to see things with some clarity. But it can be confusing.
Yeah.
It can be very confusing.
We're planning to wrap up around 8. So I've got one more question before we sort of do wrap up questions. Someone in reading the book noticed the story that you told about your son, Jude. I think the story was that you were getting ready for bed and maybe feeling kind of frazzled. And then he just comes out with, does God see us as projects? Something to fix? And your short answer was no. but then you had some ongoing conversations, and this person was just curious, what did that look like?
Mhm.
You know, if you could just talk more about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, well, I actually love this story. This is such a like a precious story in my memory and with Jude. And yeah, I mean, I think it just, sometimes kids say things that feel like so old. Like he was only 4 at
Mhm.
the time. It like a very mature question, like questions I think I have asked God or thought, kind of about as I've thought about faith. And so I think with that question in itself, it struck me because I just felt like he has an old soul and is very sensitive. And I loved that he was picking out this theme, and what I think where we went and where we've gone over the years is almost the question of, am I a transaction? Is
Mm.
this a checklist? Is my faith, is me doing the right thing sort of like just this linear checklist transaction? Okay, move it along, right? And I think that what we continue to desire to embody and teach our kids is that sort of this idea that one of the sayings I say a lot is that we work from love,
Mhm.
not for it.
Yeah.
And when I think about Jude, like that's sort of the through line of a lot of what we've talked about, is that what we do is an overflow of an identity and experience of a God who is with us.
Mhm.
Like it is indicative of an attachment, God willing, a secure attachment
Mhm.
with God, where we are with God, is with us. And it is in that place where we are shaped. We do grow, right?
Yes.
But we do that not because we are a thing. We are not an object, I think to me that is the thing that I have seen, and I feel very passionate about just generally in my work as well,
Mhm.
because I think so much, we've talked so much about a lot of clinical things tonight. And in a way, this theology right here to me holds it all.
Yeah.
Because if we, and it's not like we're going to always experience this perfectly, but if we can come to experience being held by God,
Mhm.
this creates a place from which it's not about getting it right all the time. It's not about having a perfectly regulated nervous system. It's not about that you did like none of this is a project.
Mm.
Like for the people who are listening, you
Mhm.
are not a project. We are not projects.
Mhm.
I think it's a way of considering, how can I more fully inhabit the truth of who God made me to be?
Yeah.
And because God made us with bodies, and because the incarnation is pivotal to the experience of our humanity and our faith, we don't bypass this reality that we have a nervous system, that we have these things, and that learning to tend to them actually allows us to more fully experience God.
Mm.
Not that God ever left us.
Right.
That's not the question. The question is, are we able to be present enough? Like, I love this quote by Richard Rohr. I've loved it for so long. I think I have it in Try Softer. And he says, if we are present, we will always and eventually come to experience the presence.
Hmm.
And so much of our work is about trauma keeps us from being present.
Mhm.
Pain keeps us from being present. Discrimination and oppression and hardship and all these things, right?
Mhm.
And yet they're part of the human experience. So can we learn to be with those things and be in our body, knowing that God is here and we will continue to experience God as we do those things?
Mm. Thank you. As we're wrapping up tonight, I wonder if you could share how people could keep in touch with you And if someone wanted to find a therapist like you and they were getting on psychologytoday.com, like what could they search for? And okay, so this is like 3 questions. If you have upcoming projects.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Yeah.
If I forget one, feel free to remind me. You can find me on Instagram at Aundi Kolber. So just my name. And then I've been writing a little bit more on Substack for folks who are interested. That's kind of where my like newsletter-ish type thing is. And you can just look me up, Aundi Kolber. I also have a website, aundikolber.com, and I've got a good amount of resources there. I don't know if you guys found them for Strong Like Water Guided Journey or not, but I've got videos. Yep. Awesome. So those are places to follow up with me. And then, yeah, great question about therapists. It's always a tricky one, but let me tell you a couple of things that I recommend. One, I would say, I think finding someone who is potentially in the realm of like EMDR or what I would say internal family systems therapy. I think sometimes too, you could potentially somatic therapist. And then depending, and I just say this like, because it's not everybody is coming from a different place. You might also put in Christian therapist. Now, and this is just something that I just am always very gentle with faith and just knowing that I really like to give people lots of agency because sometimes people actually maybe don't want to start there. So just know that that's something to consider, because that might help bring up folks that would be a good fit. And here's what I'll also say. I recommend finding at least maybe 3 therapists that you might want to interview. And if they're willing, a lot of therapists give like a free, like maybe 15, 20 minute, basically consultation. Okay. And I recommend if you can having a little bit of a conversation with them and notice how you feel when you talk to them. Like consider, is this someone that I feel like maybe not right now, but I could consider, I feel like I could consider opening up to them. I could see myself feeling comfortable with them. You might ask them if they ever work with folks who have, like with issues similar to what you want to work through. So if it's trauma, then I would ask about that. If it's family systems, if it's religious trauma, if it's, there's lots of different things. I would ask that therapist if they have experience working in that area. Because I think those types of questions like give you a lot to sort of take in. And then you can compare the conversations and kind of feel out which one is maybe the best potential for you.
That's great advice.
And then the last question I think was about upcoming projects. And yeah, so I do have upcoming projects. I'm not talking about it a ton yet. Okay. Partly just because I'm about a year out. And so I kind of hold it close to my chest for a while. But what I would say is that it's a book that I just have been putting so much of my heart into. And I feel like it is it's some similar themes to my other work, but I think it's a little bit of a refinement even of like, how do we learn to not just listen to our body and those, which is wonderful, and not just talk about trauma, but what does it look like to continue to remain sort of connected to ourselves in the midst of like a world like ours. Because I find that so often, I think it's like building that capacity and that resilience.
Yeah.
Today.
A lot of what we talked about today. Yeah.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. So it's kind of some deepening of those themes.
Very, very cool. I think I saw on your Instagram that you just turned that manuscript in. Is that right? I
turned the manuscript in. Yes. But it's like, I have a good amount of, thank you. I have a good amount of editing to do.
Oh yeah.
So I've got a robust editing process ahead of me, but I do feel so proud of that. And it just feels like, it's such a cliche, but it really does feel like I have book babies. Like it's like, I'm like, what can I say? Sometimes cliches work.
I mean, before I was preaching every week, I felt like a sermon was a baby. Like it just felt like the work of, so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now I do that every week. And so it doesn't quite hold the same. But thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for the work that you're doing. I really, really appreciate, we did have a very clinical discussion, and I really appreciate that part of your work, and that it's also full of faith and theology. Sometimes I find conversations tend to more toward the theological, which is great, but the clinical is really important too. And so I really appreciate how you mesh those two together.
Thank you for saying that. And yeah, that's so important to me, because I think to me that's the practical, right? It can sound really good, and it can sound like, yeah, this is what we want to do. But it's like the orthopraxy, right? And to me, there's been a big gap in the Christian world for the orthopraxy, that people need the granularity of what does this really look like right now in your body, in your everyday life. So thank you for that feedback.
Yeah. And thank you for your generosity and your time and being with us today.
You're so welcome.
All right. Well, I think we're going to wrap up now. Thank you so much.